Hi, I'm Stephanie Otts. I'm the director of the National Sea Grant Law Center, and this is a recording of the advocacy presentation that myself and Jim Fawcett at USC Sea Grant have been doing for a couple years now. So we call it the role of Sea Grant in connecting science to policy. Some of you may have seen a previous recording, but this is an update to try to keep the information more current. So advocacy continues to be a hot button issue within the Sea Grant community. Over the years, some of the most heated discussions I've experienced revolved around the issue of advocacy. But I also think we've come a long way in recognizing the challenges and learning to navigate them. There tends to be a lot of angst around this issue. This may be in part due to the fact that years ago, it used to be portrayed as a black and white issue. Sea Grant extension personnel are non-advocates, pure and simple. Generally speaking, that's a true statement. But we need to recognize that that's a nuanced statement because it often looks and feels like we're advocating for lots of things. When Jim Fawcett and I were working on the advocacy chapter in the Fundamentals of Extension book, our objective was to try to reduce some of this angst by highlighting these gray areas. It's really not an easy issue to get your head around, so don't feel bad if you feel like you're kind of flailing around a little bit, and it's not one that has a lot of easy answers. There are a few things that most people would agree are out of bounds, but there's a lot of fuzziness around the edges. And this isn't just an issue that Sea Grant struggles with. It's a debate within the scientific community and within federal agencies. So the goal of this module is to encourage everyone to embrace the gray, take a deep breath, become more familiar with what's driving the discussions, and explore ways that we as individuals can resolve some of the tensions. It's important to note at the outset that each of you and your programs will navigate these waters a little differently, depending on where you're living, what issues you're working on, and the communities and the stakeholders that you work with. So our goal is to facilitate discussion. So this is an intro presentation that's really to seed the ideas and thoughts for discussions within your programs. So what are kind of these forces? And so I think of these as two sides of, a coin or a continuum of neutrality to advocacy. And they're kind of pulling us together towards this idea. We know that, not everyone likes this term, but of being some sort of honest broker of information, of being the trusted party that people can come to. So what does the neutrality side look like? So Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines neutrality as the quality or state of being neutral. And neutral means not engaged on either side, specifically not aligned with a political or ideological grouping. So think about the first thing that pops into your mind when someone says neutrality. Switzerland, that's what I usually think of. The nation certainly made a name for itself by refusing to choose sides, whether during a war or with regards to an economic policy. In Sea Grant, the phrase "we're neutral" is thrown around a lot, like it's a foregone conclusion and a simple thing. But it isn't. Ensuring that you and your Sea Grant program as a whole avoid becoming aligned with any political or ideological group is hard, and that includes stakeholder groups. There are real costs to staying neutral. You may have to avoid working with or accepting funding from certain groups, or you may have to just do the opposite, work with individuals or organizations you don't necessarily agree with to make sure that all voices are heard. So one of the most important things that I think that we can recognize and acknowledge is that none of us are neutral. This is why the advocacy conversation is so hard. As individuals, we hold personal and political views based on our value systems, morals, ethics, and hopes and dreams for our families, communities, and country. Do I personally think we should take action to reduce our impact on the natural world, even if that makes some of the things we buy at Walmart more expensive? Absolutely. But it's important for me to recognize that my answer is based on things that I value: a clean environment, support of domestic production, and that I'm financially in a position to be able to afford that statement. If I valued other things more, such as economic efficiency, or I had a different job, my answer might be different or more nuanced. I may disagree with someone who gives a different answer, but that doesn't make them wrong in an absolute sense. Because values, morals, and ethics are involved, there really aren't any right or wrong answers. The challenge for us as Sea Grant personnel is not to make ourselves neutral as individuals, but to ensure that our programs and projects are neutral. So as we do our work, we need to be aware of how our values and goals impact our views of the world. This is even more important given the hyper-partisan world that we're living and working in. We have to be aware of echo chambers that can be created by social media and our own biases. Sea Grant has to know where its constituents are coming from and don't dismiss their arguments out of hand. Even if you don't necessarily agree, it's important to understand all sides of the issue or argument in order to design effective outreach programs and materials. And what's on this slide, is in new information, but again, I think it's important to talk about and acknowledge that another reason why staying neutral is hard is that science doesn't make the decisions that communities need to make any easier, right? Science simply gives them more information upon which to base their decisions, information that may or may not point in a particular direction. As the slides suggest, facts, data, knowledge, none of that equals the answer. Why? Again, because our values impact and the ultimate decisions that we make as individuals, communities, states, and nations. So let's say for sure that we knew sea levels would rise 5 inches in a particular coastal community. How does that information really help that community? Well, at least now the community knows what to expect. They have something solid to guide their planning decisions, but does it tell them what to do? No, not really. Should they raise awareness of the threat, encouraging property owners to take individual responsibility for risk management? Should they put public money towards infrastructure improvements? If so, how much and what should the improvements be? Should they more aggressively regulate activity on private land to force people to address the threat? So before a community can decide what to do about sea level rise, they need to figure out a lot of things about their communities, such as how much risk are they willing to accept? Maybe the community wants to roll the dice and deal with the consequences as they come. Some people live riskier lifestyles than others. What do they want their community to look like in the future? Does the community want an active beachfront with boardwalks, shops, and restaurants? Maybe that's currently the primary economic engine in the community and they can't afford to let it go. If the community is small or tight-knit, there may be some values based on religious beliefs, for instance, that need to be taken into consideration. For these reasons, I suspect that it's frustrating for our stakeholders when Sea Grant hides behind the science and just says, listen to the science. Ultimately, the decision is theirs to make, but we need to recognize that they are looking to us for more than just the facts. Even at its best, science can only inform decision-making. Sometimes that data is so overwhelming that it compels a certain response. For instance, if you know a tornado is coming your way, you can get into a shelter. But Science cannot substitute for making a decision, no matter how much politicians and decision makers wish it to be so. And briefly, unfortunately, we know that science is often politicized, and it's not just by politicians. Even if Sea Grant Extension personnel could just deliver the facts, they wouldn't necessarily be neutral. Scientists are human, and just like the rest of us, they view the world in a particular way. Personal values, morals, and ethics impact how science is conducted, how scientific results are interpreted, and drive arguments about how those results should be used. There's nothing wrong with this. Scientists should be allowed to test theories and explore questions that they are passionate about. But it's naive to suggest that in areas where science is needed to inform policy, that scientists can and do remain above the fray. In fact, scientists are being encouraged to advocate for their science and their research results. Climate change has been ground zero for scientific engagement in the political process, with scientists using their scientific studies to argue for and against political action. Again, there's nothing inherently objectionable about this. University researchers have the academic freedom to speak freely about their findings, and they can speak as loud and as often as they wish. If the science is trying to raise awareness of a new technology or a new health threat, this type of advocacy is important and may be the only way to get the scientific information out of the academic journals into the hands of someone who can do something. But in some cases, the science becomes a proxy fight for a political goal. It's politicized. Think about what happened with the science regarding tobacco use or food research today. Sea Grant programs can easily be drawn into these proxy battles, especially as we're encouraged to work on emerging NOAA priorities, that is national political priorities such as aquaculture development and climate adaptation. First, it's impossible for one person or even one program to stay on top of all of the best available science in any field, let alone all the fields that are relevant to Sea Grant programming. Sea Grant needs to draw on expertise from natural science, social science, economics, law, public policy. I think it's important that we admit as individuals and Sea Grant programs that we might not know what the best science is off the top of our heads, and that we might need to spend some time and money to compile that information to inform our programming. Again, we have to be aware of the echo chamber. Sea Grant personnel have to be careful not to misuse science by cherry picking or mischaracterizing the data or results to achieve our desired ends. Second, there's always the risk that the science we use is or could be politicized. We could unwittingly share scientific studies or reports that have been produced with an underlying agenda. It's important to understand where the information you use is coming from and when there are any embedded biases. This is especially true if information is coming through think tanks or nonprofit organizations. Some strive for nonpartisanship, but others have clear political motives. On the flip side, of course, even when we know we're sharing the best available science, the information we put out there could be misused by individuals, decision makers, and politicians. It's not always possible to control the use of Sea Grant information and products, and fear shouldn't stop us from working on controversial issues, but we need to be aware of them, as sometimes potential problems can be anticipated and managed. So those were the forces pulling us away from being neutral. Well, what does it look on the other side if you start from, an advocacy position? And because of all those forces I just talked about pulling us away from being neutral, that's why questions of advocacy are inevitable. Sea Grant stands for things that many of us feel passionate about. Many of us love the ocean and the coast. The desire to protect those places drove us to our careers. Many of us believe that science education, especially marine education, is important, whether it's formal or informal. And we believe that research efforts should be supported, and those results have a role to play in addressing environmental and social problems. Does this make us advocates? I think yes and no. So I'm a lawyer, so words and definitions are important to me. When I read the definition of advocacy from Merriam-Webster's dictionaries, I don't see Sea Grant in there. Generally speaking, so the definition on the slide is the act or process of advocating or supporting a cause or proposal. I haven't encountered many Sea Grant folks who seem to be engaged in that. When I think of a cause, I think of animal rights, abortion, gun control, opposition to coal-fired power plants. Merriam-Webster's defines a cause as a principle or movement militantly defended or supported. But obviously the term advocate means different things to different people. When someone says we're advocates, they may not have this particular dictionary definition in mind. They may just be using the term in a more general sense, such as advocating for a position. And the definition of advocacy is obviously open to interpretation. I've heard many within the Sea Grant community struggle with NOAA priorities. Are our focus areas resilient communities or healthy ecosystems, sustainable seafood causes? Maybe there are principles upon which we build our programs and things that we actively work to achieve. But on balance, I think not. They're more like value statements that help us frame our work. And who can really object to a healthy ecosystem, right? Who doesn't want that? So the National Sea Grant Office doesn't have a policy on advocacy. This is intentional. If there was a policy, it would have to be enforced, and it's not really possible to set strict rules with respect to advocacy. However, as a best practice, as an ideal to strive for, Sea Grant personnel should refrain from advocacy. That is, they should practice non-advocacy. Sea Grant personnel have professional responsibilities to ensure that we don't use or disseminate scientific or policy information in a manner that distorts findings to reinforce our personal positions, values, or beliefs. For many of us, all or a portion of our salary is funded through federal and state grants. So there are funding restrictions that we must abide by. For example, federal funds can't be used for lobbying. Lobbying is a particular type of advocacy, conducting activities aimed at influencing public officials and especially members of a legislative body on legislation. The NOAA Code of Scientific Conduct, which applies to all recipients of NOAA funding, also requires that we strive to be professional, courteous, and fair in working with others and respectful of the ideas of others. By accepting non-advocacy as a best practice, extension agents can protect their credibility with stakeholders and their jobs. Saying that we should practice advocacy is one thing. Actually implementing that practice is another. What can we do besides avoiding the red flags, such as taking partisan positions, engaging in lobbying, or ignoring or dismissing other points of view? So one option, at least with respect to the interface of science and policy, is to try to clarify and expand the choice, the scope of the choice available to decision makers. So an author, Roger Pilkey, refers to someone working in this capacity as an honest broker of policy alternatives. Again, I'll point out, I know within this Sea Grant community, there's a bit of a debate about this term, honest brokers, but Jim Fawson and I were really looking at this one particular book that has been out there about this, and a particular thought about how you interact with policymakers. So instead of simply providing our stakeholders with pure facts and data, Sea Grant personnel can help stakeholders place that scientific understanding into context. So rather than just informing a community that sea levels are expected to rise by 2 to 4 inches and then letting them struggle to figure out what that means, we can help them understand what it means. If that level of sea level rise happens, how much critical infrastructure will be underwater? Are there critical habitats that will be impacted? Many of us do this without thinking about it. We are sharing information for a reason, and we know that that isolated data is meaningless. But to be an honest broker is more than just articulating what that data means. It's also about helping our stakeholders understand the options. This type of approach can be useful when there's a lack of a value consensus and high uncertainty, such as with climate change. So Sea Grant personnel can bring information to the table, facilitate the deliberation process, and in some cases, expand the range of options under consideration. But ultimately, the community has to decide how to move forward and what costs and risks they are comfortable incurring. What we shouldn't do is limit our stakeholders' choices by presuming we know what's best for them or what their desired outcomes are. We may think that the community should protect a working waterfront or a coastal wetland, but the consensus in the community may be that economic development opportunity of a new business is more desirable. If we only present them with the policy options that protect the area in question as is, and not with the policy options that enable the new development while offsetting some cost, we are in essence making the decision for them. So we need to respect the desired outcomes of our stakeholders, even if we don't necessarily agree with the choices that they make. So I hope that, I hope that you found this presentation helpful and that it's useful as you and your individual programs or in your regions talk more about this. I encourage you to think of hypotheticals and develop some strategies within your own programs about how you might want to navigate this issue of advocacy. Thank you.